So, also remembering like where they're situated in their experiences, are able to like tell their stories, feel super empowered around that. Um, that feels inspiring to me because we want all youth, particularly youth who come from um, communities where that they're not always seen as being able to tell their stories or have that kind of a voice. So there's just something for me that's powerful about that. Um, and the other thing that I would say is, Beth, I was thinking back on what you mentioned. I appreciate you kind of naming, like, as a white woman or somebody with privilege, what does it mean to be telling someone else's story? And I think that's important to recognize and acknowledge the the ways that might land on some people. And I also think as educators, for those of us, there's many white women educators or folks with privilege who are doing this work with our students, there's many ways to create a learning environment and kind of scaffold and build on how would you actually do that. Because in some ways, as an educator, your students are looking to you to model, like, how do we learn about others and learn about difference and understand how power and privilege and difference are things that we may not be accustomed to. And so they're looking for models for that. So my hope is, as we begin to think about all these powerful statements that are in the policy and in the procedures, what does that really, how do we operationalize that? And that will just take time. Some people have a stronger skill set around how to do that, like in the classroom, like as Mark was saying, the folks who are on the front lines. For you as school board leaders, as school leaders, I think it's also important for me too, to like keep building my racial literacy, my muscle around how I'm talking about this, like noticing where my gaps are, where my discomfort is. But recognizing that as people have a lot of influence as board members to influence this policy, what more do you need to understand in order to do that? So that's kind of where we're going to move to next. Any last comments about or anything else that's sitting with people around this conversation? I appreciate all the reflection, and when you have some free time, feel free to look at the other ones that I sent. Yeah. Yes, Beth. Beth and then Colleen.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think too, just the thought of like being, continuing education, I think it's important for school board members so that we are understanding and why we are advocating for that policy. So if something does become controversial, we are fully educated ourselves to stand behind that and what the teacher's actions are.
Yeah, for sure. And Colleen.
I was going to say the part that stood out for me in the video was when the two young women said, we just graduated and we feel like we really know nothing about race. We definitely don't want our graduates feeling that way when they walk out. We don't want them in that situation where we feel like we did not prepare them. And when I said earlier, like we're all at different levels of when we're able to receive it, I think when people share their personal stories, that's not really curriculum. That's just people sharing their personal stories. And I guess where the curriculum comes in is that we make it clear up front that we want to keep exploring people's personal stories. And that, I mean, when you think of first graders all doing a historical presentation on a favorite family member, their grandparents, and where they came from, every parent wants to be there to hear that, and everybody wants to support that. It's when kids get a little bit, if we're not building our muscle around hearing it all the time, even when they're young, then when we just do it all of a sudden in middle school or high school, people are pushing back, like, I'm afraid to hear that. And then that brings up the whole like opting out of listening kind of policy. And so I feel like it's that listening that we need to make regular, and that personal sharing that becomes regular. And that, I don't know, I think that opting out of not listening is what's really hard.
So much, you said so much there, Colleen. I have so many responses to it, but yeah, I definitely appreciate it. I'm going to let Mark go and then I'll wrap us up and move us to the next piece.
Oh, I put my hand down. Thank you.
Oh, okay, Mark, you sure?
Yep.
Okay. And Colleen, I just really appreciate what you're saying. Like, yes, I think, personal stories or students sharing lived experiences is not necessarily a curriculum, but it can be part of a way of understanding who are we. So here's an example, like, who are we in this learning community, in this 6th grade class? Who is here? And building knowledge, building self-knowledge, but building knowledge about who is in that community. That doesn't even have to necessarily be a lesson around culture or race or gender or socioeconomic class or whatever. It can be more about, who are we as we want to understand ourselves as learners, and we build a community where everybody feels like they have a voice and can be part of this. So, I mean, I have a lot to say about that. And I think instructionally, there's things that I hear you saying, I think, that we would need to be aware of and cautious of because of how that can shut some students down and other students can choose to not engage. But again, I think what's most important is that if the district is saying that what we want to do is be able to make sure we're not omitting the perspectives of a range of different diverse social groups, then how do we also allow students to bring their experiences in as well? Whether there's a completely all white Vermont based group of a classroom, right? Where that's what your population is, so, or who your population is. So there's lots to say about that. And I appreciate the, kind of thinking about it. So I'm going to move us to this next piece because I wanted to make sure we were doing that by 7:00. As I said, I think what we're all trying to do here and is lofty in 2 hours. And so I know that there'll be some, more conversations on operationalizing this. But for now, Christine, are you able to share the Google Doc, which might
Yes.
be easier for you to do?
Do you want it presented or do you want me to share the link so people have access to it?
Actually, that's even better. Let's do it
Okay.
that way. Thank you.
Yeah. I'll just put it in
And
the
so
chat.
as you're doing that, let me tell folks what I would like us to do. Because there's a lot in this, and I know that not everyone had an opportunity to add to it. So what I thought we could do is if you can click on that link and spend a little time seeing what the inputs were to each of those questions. And I just want to say out front, these were 3 questions. They are not the end all be all questions. There might be other questions that we need to be posing as we think about how we look at mission statement, how we operationalize when we talk about an equity and anti-racism policy. But this is a beginning point. I would like to give folks a minute to look at those responses. And then what I'd like to do is move you into, am I able to do that?
Just, can you try it again, Beth? I just changed the setting. So
Oh.
make sure everybody had access.
Oh, right.
Good. Okay.
Gosh, I'm sorry, y'all. I can't remember. Is it easy to move into breakouts on Google Meet?
Yes. And I'm
We can
happy
do
to
that.
do that
Okay, thank
for
you.
you. Yep.
I'm just saying, y'all, next time we're doing Zoom. Okay, great. So if you could take a minute and just see what the inputs were. So for those of you who weren't here and weren't aware of this so-called homework assignment, I had just posed these 3 questions that I wanted folks to begin to think about as we, again, I keep using this word, operationalizing, implementing what this is going to look like in actions. But these felt like a good beginning conversation. Then what I'd like to do is once you've taken a look, I'd move us into groups of 3. So there's some good, and give you some time together to, if you haven't had a chance to respond to those questions and just talk about what you're seeing in that Google Doc so far. And then we're going to come back together and begin to discuss that and just wrestle with it ourselves as a full group. So I'll give you a minute I'll stop talking. Hi, Elizabeth. Hey. I think you're muted. Mm. Okay. Got it. All right. So as folks are finishing up, taking a look at that, what I'd like to do, I'm just watching the clock closely and thinking about how to use our time. So Christine, if we can move folks into small
Yep.
groups of 3, and while you're getting that set, what I would ask folks, just because there's a lot here, I would like us to focus in your small group conversations on the first, number 1 and number 3, like the first and the last 2 questions. I think we can come back to, because the middle question is important, absolutely. And it's also thinking about recruitment and retention, which is something else that will come along down the road. But just for the work of the school board for this moment, I'd really like us to, and I think there's some rich responses already to this first one about the district's mission statement and core values. I'm not sure who put this response in. I think it was one person who said, I can't even find them on the website. And I was affirmed to hear that because I couldn't find it either. And I spent a lot of time with it this afternoon. So I think there would be some good work and some good conversation about how do we understand better how to uplift and kind of put out front the mission statement and core values, like what are those? The third one I think is important also because it is, again, asking you as school board members, when you go back and look at the anti-racism policy, and this other document that I have, which I could not find on the website, which is the anti-racism procedures, it would be a good conversation for us to have around what is your capacity to give attention to those documents, which will address the impact of what it means to only have a dominant culture perspective. So we will get to that. But I think if we could focus on those 2 prompts, the first and the third, and it is, I think by the time I get there, it'll be 7:15. And
How much time would you like, Mary?
I would like 15 minutes.
Okay.
I think that's a good chunk of time.
Okay.
And I'll say one more thing before you do this. And if folks, while you're on the doc, if for board members, or I guess, yeah, for anyone who wants to add into that doc, feel free to do that because it's a working document and it'll be great to have those inputs so that particularly, you know, when Christine and I sit down together, or I sit down with other folks, that we have like this document that we're getting all this input from would be super helpful. So feel free to add to that. Okay, so I will, oh, hi, Elizabeth.
Hi,
Are
sorry.
you back?
What is our mission statement?
I'm coming to believe we don't have one.
We had one years ago. The ed team worked on one about like 5 or 6 years ago, but we never formally adopted it. You may remember working with Jan Willie, those of you that were on the board at the time. But we never had a formal adoption process. And frankly, it wasn't the whole community. It was just the administrative team working on a goal statement. I mean, a mission and vision. So it's been lacking.
That's helpful. Thanks, Angela. I think it was you who might have said that because I was searching thinking something's wrong with me. Why can't I find it? But it wasn't up front. So that's an interesting piece of work to think about, particularly in light of the directive around anti-racism and equity. Yeah, Marie.
We do have a strategic plan though. So maybe if someone could put the link to that in the chat, then that way we all could, you know, refer to it as we're talking.
Thanks, Angie.
Yeah. I can do that, or is it easy for someone else to do it?
I can do that.
Okay, thanks. That's great. I did look at that as well today. So I just want to say to you all, you have a lot of really solid pieces of work done. you're positioned well compared to some other places where I'm working or what I'm hearing. So I just want to, it might seem like, wait a minute, why don't we have a mission statement? I think these things are just unfolding. There's lots of things that people just haven't given attention to because it was more important to pay attention to the humans in the last 2 years than it was to other things. But there's a lot of good pieces here. And I think the question is like, what do we do with them? So, Rebecca.
I'm just concerned about, we do have the strategic plan, but like others, I was not able to find a mission or a vision statement. And I think that we really do need to, I mean, if we want to down the road incorporate our strategic plan, but I think that we really want a mission and a vision statement that's on our website that our community can go on and read. We don't want to just say, look at our strategic plan. I think that'll just throw our community off. They're not going to go there. So I just want to, I'm saying, let's be careful with using that.
Yeah, for sure.
I think
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Individual, sorry for the ducks. Individual districts have mission statements. I don't think we
Yes.
need one for our whole supervisory union because then we would have to align. Then we would have to, I think that's probably where we got clogged up. Then we'd have to align everybody. And we're still individual districts within the supervisory union. So it, does that make sense? Because we are, the schools within our supervisory union are, or the districts within our supervisory union are really different. That's why.
Yeah, interesting. Angela.
My comment to that, Elizabeth, is that we are required to have a coordinated curriculum across the supervisory union. So a mission and vision statement from that perspective would be very helpful. Then we could point back to our overarching mission and vision for curriculum and other areas in which we try to function in coherence, I guess is the word I'm thinking.
Cohesive way. Yeah. Yeah. I would just say, I know there's a lot of districts struggling with this since redistricting. I mean, since, you know what I mean? What's the word?
Act 46. Act
Thank you.
46.
Thank you. So I think there's a lot of that trying to align, but also making sure that individual districts or schools feel that they have their own individualized kind of, that they get to say, this is who we are. This is our personality, or exactly. The other thing I'll just say quickly, and then when I have Christine break us into the groups, is it's a really strong strategic plan. I looked at that also. It's also interesting to think about how to uplift, incorporate, kind of put out front more of the equity and anti-racism and diversity goals, so that they are kind of more front and center and not compartmentalized. Because if we're talking about the educational equity framework, it will be interesting. I think that, we wouldn't revisit this until, 2024. But again, as you're thinking about even the mission statement and the core values or the vision is what's it like to put educational equity out front and name that as a priority, and how everything that's happening from recruitment, retention, guidance, student support services, all of it, curriculum, hiring, professional development is being seen through that lens. So I will stop talking and Christine's going to move us, and I'll see you all at 7:30.
Okay.
Great.
It looks like I've got a couple of rooms that are there goes Katie. Okay. So Daniel and Tony, are they're welcome to go to rooms if they want to, correct? But they don't have to.
No, I'm just a member of the public
Okay.
observing, so
Okay.
I'm more comfortable just sticking with that. I
Perfect.
appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
Okay. So Mary, if you're going to stay there, I'm going to go to room 2 because there's just one person in there. Is that okay? If I can figure out how to get myself there. Let's see. No, maybe I can't. Let's see. Sure.
And can you hear me?
Hi, Katie. I can hear you.
Okay, I went to the breakout room and Elizabeth can't hear me. So I came back out of the breakout room because I'm trying to, it's just Elizabeth and I, and we're having a great conversation. I'm either signing, she's lip reading, or I'm typing.
No.
Diversity, being the disabilities coordinator has its perks. But anyway, so at least you can hear me. So it's not my computer, it's got to be hers. So
Yeah.
let me go back in. I'll be back.
Okay. All right. I'm here. I'm sure that wasn't enough time, right? That was not enough time. You know? I was like, oh, I'm giving them 15 minutes. Just goes by so fast. There's so much to talk about. So yes, there's so much to talk about. I'm sure a lot got excavated there, and what I hope is that we have a half an hour so that we can spend a little bit of time hearing from the different small groups and going back to the Google Doc and seeing if there's some other really important information we want to add into that. And then I'd like to spend like maybe the last 5 to 8 minutes talking with you all, or sort of exploring what the next steps are, so that people feel like we have some kind of a concrete plan before we end at 8 o'clock. So I'm wondering if, I'm just going to call out somebody and see what group you were part of. Colleen's group, Pear, or anything that you, and if you feel like you don't have more to share at this point, or you're, that's fine. I just want to make sure we get all the voices in.
I'm happy to talk for our group.
Go ahead,
great.
Nicole.
I feel like, I mean, we spent a lot of time talking about the 5 values of the strategic plan, the 5 goals of the strategic plan. And I do feel like those fit really well, even though they don't explicitly call out equity. I think they point towards ways to start to understand other people's experience in our society.
Yes.
And we went to those 5 goals because we really couldn't find much for a mission statement otherwise, except for Windsor School or the Mount Scottney School District. So we went there, and then we didn't really get to talking about question 3, but the one comment that I have on question 3 that I just struggle with, and somebody else brought it up in their reflection as well, is that we live in a society where no one has time to participate in school. And when we've seen it just since my kids started in school, the volunteerism has absolutely plummeted. And I think that's just a reflection of the fact that people need to work like crazy in order to stay afloat, and that the only people that are available to put the time into this work are the people that are more financially stable and higher economic category, and that makes it completely non-representative.
Yeah.
So, we didn't talk about that. That was my personal opinion, but I was about to say that when we got cut off. So that was our group.
Really
and
appreciate
another
that.
thing.
Yeah.
Nicole raised a really good point. Just talking about the difference between education and mental health, and how in today's society, we've blurred a lot of those lines, and that we need to make sure that, sorry, my camera keeps cutting out. We need to make sure that in schools that we leave the mental health up to the professionals, and that we work on education. And I think that because we have a mental health crisis in our country, that's hard to do because we all care about the kids so much. But I think that was a really important point.
Yeah. All great points. Thank you, especially around the community involvement piece, which I know is a struggle everywhere. I do think there's some creative strategies that we can explore, at least to get information or data or input, but it is definitely a chronic problem. Rebecca.
I did want to speak to that piece, the volunteerism piece, and hopefully we can come up with some creative ideas, because I know people that would volunteer and participate, and yet when I ask them, well, why won't you? And they say, well, I never thought that what I can bring to the picture would count. And some people have always been marginalized and not seen themselves in that particular role, and as a result, it's not that they're not able to go there. It's just that there's this mindset that I don't belong there.
Super important information, right? To think about when we talk about a community where we want those voices, how do we set up a culture and a tone for that? I mean, it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to be able to actually live it. So really important. I'm taking some good notes here from all this input. Other folks. Katie and Elizabeth, did you actually besides using sign language, were you able to communicate with each other?
I tried lip reading, but a better solution.
Oh, so sorry.
We
Any
tried-
input? Yeah.
We just agreed. We basically agreed that this is a perfect time to write a new mission statement for the supervisory union, and that a lot of things might fall into place as a result.
Yes. Great. Beth?
One thing we kind of were, because we were kind of wrestling over the mission statement and core values thing around there, was that really if we just changed the question and just said, what's the portrait of the graduate and what's the strategic plan, are they aligned, right now? And with the folks we were talking, we were like, yeah, they are aligned. That's good. Like and so it's almost like, what do we, is it worth the effort of trying to do a mission statement? Is it just like, who's going to look at that? Is it just for us? Is it more, what are the actions that are coming out of it? That is more what I think, this is my own opinion of what I think the public wants to see. What are the actions that are coming out of the portrait of the graduate and the strategic plan around that? And the other thing around, public participation and how can we get underrepresented folks, it's really, I hate, you need to pay people for their time. Volunteerism is a luxury. And that is most people don't have that luxury. And so, we need to start thinking about how can we pay people for their time? Is it, with literally cash, gift cards for food, babysitting, like all of the above. And really what times can we be meeting with people? Because, this is not an ideal time for most people with young children, so it's, I think, really looking deeply at that. And then when we were talking about other diverse audiences, really diving deeply into our hiring practices, because we always say we advertise widely, but like, do we ask the question, and is there a checkoff box? What ethnicity are you? Like, do we know we're getting a diverse candidate pool? And if we don't even know that, then like we're not even collecting the right data yet to even say yes or no around that.
There's lots of great resources and great work that's being done around that for sure. And I think, again, when I look at, I don't know, maybe y'all can help me just for a second. I have this one document that says anti-racism procedures. I don't have a date on it.
It goes with the policy.
Yeah.
That goes with the policy. Oh, okay. Oh, I see. So it's all part of that. Okay, got it. I must have got it when I did the in-person, when I met way back in person. So again, what I try to go back to when I'm working with districts is, to see what language has already been crafted. And so I don't think it would be a far reach to think about, a mission or vision. I think it's interesting, Beth, what you're saying is, why and for whom, which I think is interesting. And I also feel like if the framework of educational equity is so clearly stated in these documents, how does that show up in other places? For example, in the portrait of a graduate, I didn't see like specific language that shows up like in the anti-racism policy or procedure language. So, and this is more work that we will have to continue to do. It's not going to happen tonight, but I think also around hiring, it's very interesting when you think about if these are if you have an entire list of definitions, for example, which are also really powerful as part of that policy, and talking about, how to eliminate inequitable practices, hiring, recruitment, retention are a significant piece of that. So it would be interesting to think about how we could take different sections of this and think about how do we operationalize that. Elizabeth, you had your hand raised?
I was just gonna say, I'm sorry I have my camera off, but you all were stuttering because my connection's bad. I was just gonna say that I think the strategic plan and the portrait of a graduate are very, very well aligned. One gave birth to the other, but they have nothing to do with the anti-racism, really nothing to do with the anti-racism policy and procedures. And there's a lot of work to bridge those things, as you were just saying, Mary.
Yeah. And I will tell you that if you're looking at, casting a wider net for postings, casting a wider net of diverse candidates of all different ranges of diversity, most folks, I know particularly brown and black folks, the first thing they're looking at is they're getting onto a district's website to see what language is there that signals to them that there's some consciousness and awareness around these issues. To have it the way y'all set up is, it's a great step. It's a little compartmentalized. It would be really powerful to think about how you're infusing the things that I'm holding here that we're talking about, these documents, into other parts of the, into other parts of these like standard documents for the district. Other inputs from folks, or any other, also I'm just interested, any reactions to what was already in the doc that people want to chime in about? We're getting to the bewitching hour. That's what we used to say in my house when my daughter was little. That was usually 5 o'clock. So I think I said this earlier. One thing I again, very inspired by is for those folks who put into the responses a lot around youth voice, having youth representation, having youth on. Maybe this is true at the school district levels, but to have, or at least with the high school, to have youth voice and to think about including that. So my sense is there's a lot. Oh, yes, go ahead, Elizabeth.
I just have one quick comment about the youth voice, and that is that the statewide youth council,
yes,
that was just enacted into law, it ranges in age from 11 to 19. So I mean, it's something to think about, and that's all of our schools.
Wow, I didn't realize it was 11. That's great. And I also think there are some ways to think about in the individual schools, are there places where students feel like they have voice? So that you can cultivate, there's ways to cultivate that early on. So then some of them feel like by the time they get to be high school students, they're running for school board or they're running for the State Board of Education. So how do we cultivate some of that student voice earlier on? Anne-Marie.
Beth was mentioning that Heartland has a student council, and I was thinking that might be something that I'll bring up about maybe I don't think Wethersfield has that, so I think it would be a good idea to start cultivating the student voice, because I don't think we really do that yet at Wethersfield.
Great.
Okay. Oh,
hey, Christine.
I'm sorry. I raised my hand. Actually, I didn't click the hand. I'm sorry. I was just going to say that part of the Leader in Me work that we're doing in Core 2, which is our next step, is creating student lighthouse teams, which are really empowering kids in leadership roles within the school and bringing the student voice into play. So I think that's a goal for all our schools for next year, which is exciting. Yeah. And it's not necessarily student council. I think there's a place for that as well, but it just elevates the student voice.
Love that. And again, I want to just remind all of us, these are all parts of how we talk about equity. So just to keep making the connection back to how to create learning communities where everyone feels they belong, where there's voice, that's equity. So it doesn't, and I've been saying this to communities where there's a struggle, a lot around like the CRT debate right now, around the critical race theory debate. And so I've been trying to move those conversations away to like when we talk about equity, belonging, a welcoming community, how that benefits everyone. So the idea of like cultivating student voice or cultivating student representation is also about equity, right? It's like creating opportunities for all those voices. And I always think like, I want to hear from the kids. Who wouldn't want to hear from the kids? Because it's almost like they're your client, like they're your customers. And sometimes because our society doesn't really have reverence for young people, we don't value that voice. And so it's just interesting, like the way that ageism shows up and adultism shows up in that a little bit too. And as a parent of a teenager over the years, I have learned that I have to walk my talk with her, which is I believe in student voice and have reverence for what they have to say and their experiences. But societally, it's not. And certainly in public education, generally, that's not the case. So sometimes we have to really be intentional about it. So I love those ideas, Christine. Rebecca.
I think as we look at whose voice is not at the table, and we want to be more transparent to community, as someone who's been on the budget committee, and you'll hear things like, well, the teachers really feel this is working great. This is great for the students. And so it would really be interesting to have a student at that conversation to be able to comment and say, whatever. Yeah, it is working for the student. And so I think that's an important area to probably also find a way to bring in student voice and because I think that student will take that back out to the community and to parents, and that sort of really shows what is it that we are doing with our students. Yeah,
that's good. I see a couple comments in here. I'm back again looking at that grid of input, and I just wanted to name this as we start to come to a close here, because a couple folks are saying like the frustration or the challenge or the not knowing how to do it is how do we get marginalized community members who experience marginalization, have a marginalized lived experience, how do we get them to these conversations? So for example, in the anti-racism policy, it talks about, committing to a panel. I can't remember where it is exactly, but I think it's also in this, committing to a panel of community members whose voices are not always heard, and we haven't gotten there yet. So again, sometimes it's also broadening what we think about or who we are thinking about, not what, but who we are thinking of when we think of marginalized community members, that it's not necessarily just folks who visibly, in terms of skin color or culture or race, show up differently, but expanding our notions of that. And I will say, when I look at this is really important information here, and I hope that other board members who weren't here tonight would take a little time and respond to these, because I think our work now is coming up with some of the responses. I don't want to say solutions because that feels so finite, but I think like what are the strategies and approaches to some of the challenges that you all have talked about, and that's also really laid out here. And I think that's the next piece of the work is, and I see a couple pieces. One is that, how do we get at some of these challenges around voice and representation, but also, I think the conversation about what are the statements, the vision, the language that we want to have out front about the vision and the mission of the supervisory, of the SU. Is that important? Is it not? And kind of wrestling with that. And then the last piece I'll say, before we take some last comments from folks, is Christine and I are meeting soon to explore again, which was part of original contract I had with you all, the idea, the exploration of a DEI coordinator for the district. So we're going to begin that conversation. I think it's an important conversation to have around like the who, what, why, when, and how, and to have some real clarity about what does it mean for the district to have that position. Is the district ready for that? Like, what needs to be in place in order for that position to thrive and succeed, depending on, of course, who that person is. And, you know, some of you may see the landscape of equity and diversity work in other districts across the state. There are many equity coordinators. There's a group now that's formed of statewide, what do they call themselves? Like a consortium of sorts who come together, and it's predominantly women of color. And so there's a lot of conversations about what does that mean for these folks professionally to be going into communities that are predominantly white, also in districts where the staff and leadership are predominantly white. So as you can see, there's a lot of things that need to be considered in just sort of understanding how this work, when we talk about the work of educational equity, is really like this huge fabric that you're weaving. And you're trying to figure out, like, when do we weave this piece and when do we weave this piece and how do we weave them together so that you're setting yourselves up for success. And I say that because I have a relationship with a lot of these equity coordinators in my work, and there have been some lessons learned in some different districts about how to do this in a way that really sets people up for success. So I think there's a lot of the pieces are here for you around that. But I also think, again, when I look at like this powerful language and the anti-racism procedures and the policy statement, I'll tell you what, when I first looked at these, when I first met you all way back, or first talked with David, I was, and I'm still impressed. I was very impressed because I thought, wow, they've really gotten some clarity about that. But in some ways, it's almost the cart before the horse a little bit, because you have a lot of good articulation here and vision. The question is, where does the practice fit that aligns with those parts? And so that's the piece that I think we really want to work on. I'm going to stop for a minute and see if there's any last comments or reactions.
So I'm just curious, Mary, if that can be, we're going to meet, I think, next week.
Yeah.
And talk about that. And maybe there can be, we can pick your brain about how to weave. I mean, we have an anti-racism task force. We have an equity audit. We have the proposals on the table. We're going to select somebody, a vendor, I think next week,
Yeah.
to do that equity audit, which will take months. It will take months, you know, to complete it. And how we begin to involve the community in these discussions. I think that's a huge priority.
Yeah. Oh gosh, thank you for that, Christian. I forgot about the audit. So that's a really important. y'all are doing everything.
Mm-hmm. And the thinking being, you know, a DEI coordinator. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts to that equity audit, and having somebody in place to help with that work and then really understand it and, you know, the outcomes and the actions that come out of that work.
Yes.
So that's just what I'm thinking.
Yes. Good. We'll talk more about that, but for sure.
Okay.
Hey, Colleen.
Can I just say, I think I heard Nikki say it earlier just about, or so maybe it was Beth just saying paying people for their time. And I was thinking before she said that about just, we tape meetings for people who can't be there. It's not the same as watching a tape meeting as being involved in a meeting or a forum.
Yeah.
So before Beth spoke, I was thinking of just offering like our events at 3 different shifts in the day and kind of rotating things for people. But I do think something like the audit, like I know Kate and I have already had parents reaching out to us and asking us about it, and Angie has tag teamed with us to talk to parents about being involved in it. I think when it's that important, that's kind of the place. Like, yeah, you do have to pay people because you want all the voices there that in this for this data.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just thinking about what you're saying, Colleen. It's just, yeah, it is complicated, and
I don't
and
think
also
we
when
could pay people for every meeting, but I think in some things where we absolutely need our community voices, there are some
Yeah.
places where we have to really consider that.
yeah, for sure. And again, I think part of it is that we're also asking people who, for the most part, experience the most marginalization, are already, suffering in some kinds of ways, asking more from them, so we can better understand how we can do a better job, is kind of perpetuating some of the things that we are saying we don't want to do. So I hear you. I think that's really important. Anyway, thank you all. It is just 8 o'clock, and I want to honor the time. And Christine.
Just in closing, so just for kind of the next steps forward, so the board knows and the public knows, Mary and I, and actually I invited Angie, our Director of Curriculum and Instruction and Assessment, to join us. Mary, if that's fine with you. We'll bring a summary of that conversation and next steps to the board meeting on June 27th, I believe, is when the next WSESU board meeting is. And hopefully have more of a, have an articulated plan forward. If that sounds good with you, Mary. You're muted, so I can't hear you, but it looks like you're shaking your head in agreement.
It's truly 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
I am, yes, thank you. That sounds great. And I'm also thinking that I think I need to culminate some of my notes here and maybe get a quick doc out to the board. Elizabeth, I can do that just to give some recommendations for next steps, or just because I do think there's some continued work that needs to happen. Clearly, I think we've identified that tonight with the SU board. And then I'm also thinking, as all these other pieces are happening at the same time, sort of like the chicken egg question a little bit. So, all right. I'm good. Thank you, everyone. I think if there's any last comments, otherwise, thank you. I also appreciate the community members who have been joining us. I want to thank you. That's, as we're talking about including community. It's always important for that. And so Tony, thanks for, and I'm not sure who else is here from the community, but I know that you are, so appreciating that engagement. And I think it also gives community members an opportunity to reflect back to board members, any ideas or thoughts that you have about the conversation that we're having. All those inputs are really important. All right, everyone.
Thank you, Mary.
Have a great rest of the evening. I'll see you all soon.
Thank you,
Take
Mary.
care. Okay.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.